hanging on.
Yep. All right, go.
Okay, great.
So, again, guys, thank you so much for coming. This is the inaugural user group for Vancouver. We're here at Talend. My name is Nick Piet. I'm the Director of Evangelism. There's Laura Ventura, we got Drew Krieger, we got Tom Bodowitz, Michael Borelli. Big group of town employees here. Happy to talk with you guys. I'm going to kick it away to Tom, give you guys a couple minutes for some of those of you who've never heard about Talend, and then we'll start into some of the technical components.
Okay, great. So, again, thanks, Nick. Tom Bodowitz. I'm actually based out of Seattle, so I'm in the neighborhood, if you will. And first off, I'd like to say thanks to our friends at Mogo for hosting us and putting it all together. Our inaugural user group. Thank you very much. So, we're looking forward to doing more of these for the community up here. We're having more and more people start to, one, even hear about Talend, and then start to implement Talend into their enterprises. And we're just starting to have a ripple effect. So really the goal is for everyone to kind of create, as part of this community, to network, share best practices, those kinds of things, know who some of your other resources are within Talend. You can ask questions of, all that good stuff. And then ideally, this will be a quarterly kind of event, and we'll continue to grow our number of users. So we've got 50 people signed up for our meetup today. And as you see, we are recording this. And then we'll be able to share it with everyone who couldn't make it, and they'll see why maybe they'll want to come and what they're missing. And it all kind of grows by word of mouth, and then feel free to forward this to people, right? So there's going to be a lot of great value that we want to deliver, because as a company, we've got a lot of interesting things happening in 2017 on our product roadmap, ways that you may want to use Talend that you haven't thought about in your day-to-day job. So this is where it kind of gives you an opportunity to see what's coming and think about how you might want to ideally make your own jobs a little bit easier through the use of Talend. Okay? All right, so with that, thanks again.
Thanks, thank you. All right, so just real quick, how many people have used Talend before, looking at Talend? A couple of you, all right. So first time hearing about Talend, knew there was free food and showed up. Good, no one's raising their hand, I like that. So we've brought one of our very astute solutions architects here. He's going to go through some of this stuff. So Michael Borelli, really smart guy. Wanted to make sure you guys had this stuff. Can't tell you how many times I personally started working with Talend, using it, and seeing some of the things I could have done better, made it and applied it to my next job. All of a sudden, things start becoming easier. Jobs become quicker, be able to accomplish more. So as a way to kick this user group off, I thought, what better to do than talk about some of the great ways you can use this and some of the best practices that you can then take home tomorrow and apply, because I know some of you probably are missing your kids, things like that. So let's make it valuable, and as Tom mentioned, this is the type of stuff that we want to have at these types of meetings. So with that, Mike, take it away.
Grab this for you. All right. Thank you. This way, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, one sec. All right. So hi, thanks for coming. This presentation is job design patterns and best practices. It was originally actually based on Dale Anderson's, who is one of our CSAs. He's the U.S. lead customer success architect. He has a blog series all about job design best practices, and that is what this is actually based on. So we'll go through the agenda real quick. So first we're going to go through SDLC development guidelines. Then we'll do the job design best practices, and then the secrets to building a successful job. So who here has actually visited the Talend blogs? Anybody? Yeah? Okay. So I really suggest checking it out. So Dale Anderson has, like I said, a whole series on best practices. But not only that, we also have some from product marketing, product management, the pre-sales engineers, and other groups within Talend. So definitely check that out. And here.
Let's say the quick blurb just to throw that.
Yep.
There's technical stuff too. Right? It isn't just your marketing BS. It's
No, actually, I'm just really trying to show you where to go.
I'm on the marketing team. I can see
Yeah.
it's very technical in terms of the type of stuff that you can
Yeah, we're going to get there for real quick. I was just showing you the blog because it does have all the design, job design best practices. There's also a lot of other technical information there, so I do think it is worth looking at. All right, so this is me. Let's see. My name is Michael Borelli. I'm new to Talend, and so I've been in the industry for over 20 years. Specialize in ETL and big data technologies. Previously, I worked as a big data solution architect at HPE Enterprise Services. And I worked on petabyte scale near real-time systems. So that's enough about me. We'll move on. So this is an open discussion. If you have any questions, go ahead and raise your hand, or blurt it out, or whatever. So let's get started. So whenever we're using any tool, what's the first thing we really try to figure out? It's how do I use it most effectively? How do I do it the right way? So in the case of Talend, it's what's the best way to write a Talend job, right? You want to make sure it's easy to read, easy to write, easy to maintain. But really, you can only choose two. So the question is how do you decide? So if the job changes often, you'll want to make sure it's easy to maintain and easy to read. And that's, for example, there's third parties that you may be getting, and they may change their data source, all the time, their formats all the time. In those cases, you want to make sure easy to maintain, easy to read. If it's not likely to change, maybe it's a one-off. You want to make sure it's easy to write, right, and then easy to read. If you have a lot of developers touching the same code, you want to make sure it's easy to read and easy to maintain. That's pretty straightforward, right? So, Talend Studio is a free-form canvas. You have a palette. You can paint your components. You link your components together. It's mostly graphical, right? But in the end, it is a code generator. So you have to be cognizant of that fact, right? So you still have to worry about things like memory management and error handling and some of the things that you would normally have to do with code. You still have to at least think about them. So here's your first tip. Avoid monolithic jobs, okay? Don't make these really big jobs that do everything in the world. Try to compartmentalize, right? We'll get more into that later. So Talend itself has many components. When you insert this into your own architecture, it gets even more complex. There are a lot of moving parts, so you need to take it seriously. Look at the reference architectures, build your own architecture slides. Create standards, create and follow best practices. That's your roadmap to success. Okay. And so I assume everyone is familiar with SDLC of some sort, right? How about SDLC within Talend? Has anyone dived into that?
Trying to define it.
Okay. We actually have a best practices document on SDLC in Talend that includes continuous integration and deployment. So I really recommend everyone, it takes about 30 minutes. It's not a very long document. Everyone spend some time and look at this document. It's on the help.talend.com, and we can send some of this out, these links out afterwards, so don't worry about writing it down. Yeah, we have some very good documentation for this. 30-minute read, definitely worth your time. Okay, so now we'll look at it from a developer point of view. These are some foundational precepts for development. We have readability, writability. You can read it from back there, right? So which two would you think are important, or the most important? Any guesses?
Readability.
Readability, okay. Usability.
It depends.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, you're right. There you go. So it depends, right? The trick is to really balance these precepts, focus on the ones that are most important for your use cases and your environment, right? But every time we ask this question, we always get a different answer. All right. All right, so let's see. So to help keep these precepts, we create these guidelines. Now, we call them guidelines, not standards, because we try to keep them flexible. Standards are very often very rigid things that you have to keep within the box. And these are they really are just guidelines. Actually, I have some handouts for everyone, which I forgot to prepare. Sorry. These are some guidelines that we've put together that you can use as a starter. Sorry, I'll make its way over to you in a second. Okay. So really, you need to have a degree of flexibility, so you can bend, right? Because you don't want it to break. And that's really where we're going with the guidelines. We always run into things we didn't plan for, and we always have cases that don't fit into that nice box with a bow on it. So that's really where we're driving here. So it's just terminology more than anything else. Okay. And so what I'm suggesting is everyone create their own guideline documents for creating your Talend jobs. And so this is just something you can look over later as a starter. Okay. And just one more thing. So before we dive into the job design patterns and best practices, I just want to stress to you that incremental discipline is the key, right? Start easy. Start with something that everyone can do. Label all of your components. Okay, very simple, right? Everyone can do it. It doesn't take any time. You don't even have to come up with the standard ahead of time. You can do it right today. It makes the code more readable, right? And then raise the bar, right? And then come up with some standards, and that will give you some conformity, right? Another precept, and then just keep building and building from there. So it's not like something you have to do in one big thing. You can definitely work on this incrementally. Okay, so now we'll get into the job design best practices. This is the fun part. So what we're going to do here is probably either confirm things you already knew, tell you new things you didn't know, or maybe kind of help you get past, get over the line, so. All right. So what are job design patterns? Basically, you want to identify and construct foundational jobs that focus on commonly used essential and required elements, right? So using these templates, they're all about creating common and reusable code. The benefits are that it'll strengthen your code base, right? And also reduce the overall footprint. One example is, imagine you have 10 different things that you need to do that are all basically the same, and you could write 10 different jobs to do them. Or you could write one job that is a smarter job that can handle 10 different variations. Most of the time, writing that smarter job is the right way to go, right? These are things that you want to consider when building your templates.
Monolithic jobs.
What's that?
While avoiding monolithic.
While avoiding monolithic jobs, yes. And there's a balance there for sure. But there are ways that you can, there are things that we can do to help achieve that. And we'll go into that. So you want to adopt a repeatable style. This helps make it easier to read, easier to write, easier to maintain. And it's easier for developers to understand the code and write code that other people understand. So this is where the best practices come in. All right, so finally best practices, right? All right, so we'll start with an easy one. So best practice number one, adopt a common flow style, right? So there's all sorts of ways that you could place the components on your canvas, right? So you could zigzag them, right? You could build a hub and spoke. You can make something look like some abstract art my toddler did that looks like a space station or something, right? Which is beautiful, by the way. And imagine in these scenarios, like a zigzag, you have to insert new components. It can get a little difficult, right? Because now you have to move components over. You have to add new components in, shift things around.
And run out of room.
And you run out of room, right? Because you're in your mind, you're trying to keep everything staying on the same canvas, right? That can be a little difficult. So really what we recommend is go left to right and then top to bottom, okay? Even if you go off the screen, just keep going, okay? It's actually not very hard to scroll back and forth and up and down. It actually works pretty well. And it's much easier to follow. You need to add new components in between. You highlight all of your components and shift them over and put the new one in. It's very simple. So that's our first best practice. Very, very simple, right? If any questions, by the way, go ahead and ask. So, all right. So so best practice number 2: create job modules. Right, avoiding big monolithic jobs. You want to compartmentalize your code, and compartmentalization is one of those precepts. So you can create units of work by creating a parent-child hierarchy, where your parent is doing more of the orchestration, right? And your child is usually doing the various work streams, right? So this is probably pretty common if you've done any orchestration using Talend. To do this, though, you'll be using the Trun Job, most likely, right? You can use joblets, which we'll get into. One thing I wanted to call out is to look at these 3 settings here, which, let me see this. All right. This works on my laptop, but it doesn't work on this one for some reason. Okay. So I will point them out and tell you what they say. So, 1 second. Okay. All right, so the first checkbox, okay, so we're in the Trun job. Excuse me? Oh, okay. I heard something, I didn't know what it was. This is in the Trun job component tab, right? There are 3 checkboxes here at the bottom when you're using this. The first one, normally I'd be able to blow this up, guys, sorry. The first one is use an independent process to run a subjob. Okay, and by the way, subjob is not the right term here. We're talking about a child job. A subjob is actually a few components that are together, in a subjob, right, in that little box. Not sure why they named it that, but it's actually a child job. When you checkbox that, it will actually spin up its own JVM. Okay, it will not be running everything within the same JVM as the parent. So that's the first one you need to consider. If you are running a really heavy child job, you may want to turn that on, right, for this particular Trun job. The second one is die on child error. So there are a few places where you can exit out cleanly. This is one of those areas where you can specify if the child fails, then send the failure to the parent, and the parent will fail. Okay, so that's another one you need to consider if using the Trun job. The third one is transmit whole context. So Java is a pass by value, right? Not pass by reference. If you transmit the whole context, then all of your context variables will be sent in as a copy into the subjob or into the child job. In order to avoid that, it's a copy, right? So if you have a lot of these, you're going to be duplicating all that and sending it in when you don't really need to. You can basically uncheck box this transmit whole context, and you can specify exactly which context variables you need to send in. Okay. All right. So that's that one. So we'll go on to best practice number 3. So this is joblets versus Trun job. Now, if you're using the open source version, I'm thinking that you can't use joblets. I'm pretty sure you can't. Sorry, I don't remember. But Trun job would be what you'd be using most of the time. Joblets are a little different. So Trun job is called code. It's like a call out. Okay, but a joblet will actually take the code for that job and incorporate it into the parent job that you are placing it in. Most of the time, you want to use Trun job. There are a few cases where you'd want to use the joblets, and I have a case actually. Wish I could blow these up. Okay. Yeah, it's giving me an error saying can't find the file.
How are you exporting the images?
It's just I just sent the PPT over, but I created it in Windows, and this is a Mac. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I checked everything except how to actually hard plug into this setup. So
Yeah, okay.
we're using my Mac now.
Yeah, so we had to do a little bit of transfer and stuff. All right, so I'll just point it out, and we're going to go into it more later anyway, but we actually have a joblet in this example here, and that's the log processing joblet. Okay. This will basically catch any errors that occur within the process and log them appropriately. So that's one case of where you may want to use a joblet. Most cases you want to use the run job though. Is this working? Okay, yes. Okay. All right. All right, so then we have pre-jobs and post-jobs components. I don't see a lot of people using it, but it's actually really nice. So a pre-job will run any set of flow that you have before the job is running. It's like the first thing that this job will do. Post-job will make it the last thing the job does. So obviously, the pre-job is something that you would use for initialization, connecting the databases, checking if things exist, some pre-setup work that you need to do. And the post-job would be something that you would use for, wrapping up, for, closing your database connections or what have you, okay? And there really is no reason not to use this. It makes the code a lot cleaner, I think, easier to read. And then also to use the twarn and tdie components. So twarn and tdie, twarn gives you a way to write out to the log in a nice, pretty way. Tdie is, exit. So, and you can exit with return codes and things like that. We'll actually go into return codes a little more later. So. Right. Okay. So basically one of the most important things you can do is error handling and logging in Talend, or pretty much any development situation, right? You need to make sure you're handling your errors and that you're logging things appropriately. We just mentioned twarn and tdie, but it's actually it's best to create a special routine just for that purpose. And really, here's an example of the joblet I just told you about. So basically, this is a catch logs. So any errors that occur will get caught here. That's the component, and it will split it out based on the type to where it should go, right? So if it's a debug, an info, a warning, a log error, we actually have this, I believe, available in Talend's in Dale's blog that I had mentioned. I believe you can download this. The catch log does need to, the log catcher it's called actually, needs to have enabled all the actions to catch all the different types. But this is something that once you create this joblet, you can then place it into any one of your jobs, and it will make a standard out of it. Everything will be logged the exact same way. So one of the things I also wanted to show you is, you can create return codes. I'll show you this here. So, so you can actually create return codes. We have this. I'll send this link out as well. So on the tdie, you can actually create a message and an error code. Now, the end is near 4 is not very useful. So we'll actually try to make that something useful, put some useful text in there. The error code, you can actually embed some useful information in, right? Let me scroll down here a little bit, and I'll show you some examples. So here's a recommended example. Again, these are just guidelines and things to give you a start off with, right? So you can implement this all different ways. So for return code, you could do where the first character is the priority. Is it an info, warning, what have you. The second one is what subsystem is it in? And the third is what is the type of error that we're talking about, right? And, so here's an example of the priority codes, the 3, 4, 5, 6 for the info. We left off the debug stuff. And then we have the system codes, is it an operating system type error? Is it a memory error, a storage error, a network error? And then we have the type of actual error, permissions, what have you. So some examples, I guess. Invalid DB login is a 5701. So a 5 is an error, as you can see. And it's a database error, right? So 57. And then 01, permissions. All right, so this is a permissions error. So that's how you can decode it. And you can implement that pretty easily throughout your jobs. You just add the TDI with the error code that occurred. So, all right. All right, best practice number 6. Understand the difference between on sub job and on component triggers. Right. These are often misunderstood, and they can result in so we'll go through an example of what these are. So here we have a MySQL input that is selecting data, right, from the customers. It's running it through a filter, and it's saving the filtered rows to another table someplace, right? So we have a trigger here that is on subjob OK, and then we have a trigger here that's on component OK. Okay. So let's say we're selecting 100 rows here, and 25 rows get filtered and sent into a table. So in this case, on this on subjob OK, how many times would the message box 1 execute? Anybody have an idea? That's right, just once. Okay. And then we have this on component OK on the filter. So how many times do you think message box 2 would execute? Any guesses? You can just guess. So, yeah. Not just once, no. That worked once.
For every row it's processed.
That's, well, for every row that actually, for the filter one, it's every row that comes out of the filter. Okay. So this would execute 25 times. Okay. So we've actually had cases where a customer had accidentally used on component OK to do something. Functionally, it actually ended up working. So in the end result looked right. But what it was linked to was actually a very slow processing set of commands. It was only meant to really happen one time, not a million times. That'll bring a job that runs in minutes to hours, right? So that was an easy fix. All right, so what is a job loop? So the idea here, so for best practice 7, the idea here is to identify the main loop in your job. Okay, any processing job has a loop someplace, right? You have data coming in, and you're reading that data, and you're processing it, and you're maybe writing it someplace. Okay, that's your loop. Know where that loop is in your job. Okay, and know what that full subjob is that is doing that loop. Okay, because when you include things that are slow, if you do an on component, like I just mentioned, an on component OK, that's doing something that may take a long time, you're going to slow that whole job down, right? So it's pretty important that you know where that is, you recognize where it is, and you put the appropriate error handling around it, and make sure that you don't include any really slow processes in there, and try and do them as maybe a post job or post sub job. Okay. Okay. So follow an SDLC. This is probably pretty obvious, I think. But if anybody watches The Profit, you know it's all about people, product, and process, right? It's the same, pretty much. It's people, technology, and process. So we've already talked about SDLC best practices. So I probably don't need to tell you this, but you're highly advised to use an SDLC process and follow best practices around them, right? So best practice number 9. So this is managing your workspace. So Talend Studio uses workspaces by default, created under some long path. You probably want to change that. You want to probably split it away from your Talend install in case you do upgrades or what have you. You can pull away the binaries and relay it back down without having to worry about your workspace, having to copy it off someplace. You also may want to have more than one workspace. So I actually keep multiple workspaces for some things that I do. I have multiple versions of Talend installed, for example. You'd want to keep a different workspace for each one of those. really, there's not a whole lot more to say to that. The source code will synchronize to wherever you put it. Sometimes if you have really long paths, your operating system may have some problems. So try to keep that short. But. Reference projects. So I guess first, does anybody know what reference projects are? Has anyone used them before? No? What's that?
We read about them.
Read about them? Okay. So this is a way this is a way to manage your reusable code, right? So there's certain things that you may do for every job, or at least every job of a certain type, right? An example might be the log handler that we talked about, right? You may want that in every single one of your projects.
Encryption, decryption.
Exactly, yeah, encryption, decryption. So you could actually create a reference project that has that information in it, and then link your projects so that they get pulled in, okay? So this is actually handled in the TAC, and I can't blow the screens up. So, so this is the TAC administration, the Talend administration console, right? So under projects, you'll see a checkbox called reference, okay? You can checkbox that, and that will turn that into a reference project. You get a little star over here in front of the project in the TAC. And then when you want to link it, there you select the project that you want to link to, and over here in the reference projects, you click the link, and that will link it in. And then any joblets that you create and whatever else is in the metadata actually can get loaded in. So it's very useful for reusing code. It actually will show up in your studio. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Does the configuration have to happen in the TAC?
Configuration has to happen in TAC. That's correct.
Can you create like a template project that already is linked to a reference project, like for utilities?
Can you create a reference project that's already linked?
Or a
Oh.
template that already has?
Oh, you mean like force a link, like automatically?
Yeah.
Like let's say you're trying to be like administrating it so that all your users always has to have this project. There's no way to do that, no. So you have,
Standard, essentially.
yeah, exactly, yeah. You can't enforce that from the administration console. But that's not a bad idea, actually. You could put a JIRA in, or I could put a JIRA in for that, yeah. So, there's a JIRA online, and anybody can go in there and actually put in a feature request, and that's a really good one.
System, like in .NET project, you always have
Yeah.
system dot,
Yeah.
so with using system over there.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good one. The other thing that's interesting about this is you can actually nest them. So, you can have multiple reference projects, and you can nest some under others, and then assign those to your projects. Mostly you won't create more than a few reference projects. You're not going to create 100, or 200 reference projects. Usually you try to create one, but I mean, normally if you're not creating one, you're only creating like maybe 3 or 4. I mean, there's no limit. There really is no limit, but just for management of the code, you probably don't want to just create a whole bunch of them. All right.
You can link the reference projects of any other project to a job in any project.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's project level, so, yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so best practice number 11, naming conventions. So this can be for jobs, files, directories, contexts, any type of object. We have a document, here I can show you the links here. So we have a document of some suggested naming conventions that you can use online. And again, I can send that to you guys later if you're registered. One of the things that I'll just show you a few of these here if you like, but one that I personally use all the time is, putting the YYYMMDD in front of a file name or something so it sorts nicely, when I'm looking at it in the directories. But there's all sorts of naming convention standards that you can follow. You can follow these, or you can make up your own. As long as you're following something, it's better to have some conformity, right? So you do whatever makes sense for your organization. Oops. So best practice number 12, use the metadata repository. So this is all about reusability. So you want to define your metadata to allow jobs to share the same information instead of embedding them within your components themselves, right? So you ever see the built-in, if you see the source within any component. You'll see like a little built-in or repository. Using the repository is definitely the better way to go. You get to reuse them across different jobs, and so that's very good. Also, use context variables. You notice you can set different contexts. So one typical usage here, so if you set your context variables up, right, you can have different contexts based on what environment you're in. That's a very typical usage of it. So you may have, this is my dev set, this is my test, my UAT, my prod, okay? And then one nice thing that you can also do is include a variable that you kind of hard code within this context setting so that you can actually have dev, test, UAT, and prod as a string. That way, within your code, you can, or within your components, you can put in logic that says, if I'm in dev, do something special. Because maybe you don't want to select every row out of a table in your dev environment when you're doing your unit testing. Maybe you want to say only select the first 100 rows, so do a limit 100 on your SQL statement. This would be where you would get that information as to what environment you're currently in. So you can do that. Okay, so version control. This isn't about whether you should use version control. It's actually, this is about the version control that's built into Talend and when you should and should not use it. So you've probably seen the major and minor buttons on the job properties. If you're using source code control, Git, SVN, don't use those. Okay, so I'll explain what happens there. So every time you bump a version, it will actually create a new job. When you use source code control and you're bumping versions that way, it's going to have to synchronize every one of those new jobs every time you sync up to your repository. Okay, and that can be very expensive over time, and that can cause trying to bring up Studio. It takes 1 hour. Why is it taking so long? It's really ends up being in that synchronization with Git or SVN. Okay, so don't do that. If you have SVN or Git, you should be using branches and tags, and not bumping minor and major version numbers in your jobs.
Can we disable that?
You cannot disable them. So yeah, they're there. Yeah, they're there to stay. There's no way to disable them.
Because then you don't want people to use that, right? Because that's your version strategy.
Yep, that's right. Yep, you're right. Yeah, there is no way to currently do that. So now, if you're not using Git or SVN, then click away, right? So you don't have any other probably method of doing version control, so that would be your method.
So how would you, sorry to interrupt, but
That's okay, no, go ahead.
view that in Nexus to see what version this is when you're promoting it up to change?
Well, if you're using Nexus, then you're using Git or SVN, so that wouldn't probably be an issue. Yeah.
When you're trying to validate what version actually got deployed, right?
It's in the it gets put in the name, right? Isn't it put? You may overlook it because you mentally don't look at it, but it's in the name.
Like a -21.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The problem is
You-
if someone inadvertently, a new developer,
Yeah.
upgrades a version number, you don't notice it until you go to test,
Yeah.
and you can't actually move the version number back again.
Yeah, right. You cannot. Yeah. There's not an easy way to do that. But in reality, though, if you're only doing it every so often, it's not that big a deal. I mean, you could just remove the old ones out of your workspace, and it won't sync, and take it out of your repository. Yeah, you lose the history on it, though. There may be a more complicated way to try and merge that back in. I don't have a good way off the top of my head, though. So, yeah. Sorry, what's that?
Oh, XML, you should make the merge.
Probably do something like that. But it may be a little bit more of a deal, right? Because you may have to. I'm just trying to imagine how it would work, but you may have to create your own new version, bring in the XML, check it in manually, bring in the other XML, check that in manually, and then you'd be up to date, right? I mean, I think there's probably a way that you can make that work out, but
Don't click out.
yeah, just don't do it. All right. So yeah, use branching and tagging. That's really the way to go if you're using source code control, right? Let's see. So best practice 14, memory management. Be aware of how much memory you think your job is going to use. If you have a lot of lookups, TMAP lookups, could be using up a lot of memory, right? Depending on what kind of lookups you have set up and what have you. You probably want to be aware of those. There's also some parallelization that you can use as well, which we'll get into in a little bit. We'll go through the parallel. That's the last one, actually, that we'll do. And that will also increase the memory usage quite a bit. So those are some more things to keep in mind. The job server that you're running on only has a certain amount of memory, a certain amount of resources on it, CPU, memory. So when you create your job, you want to keep it in mind. Don't throw everything in the world at it, right? Now, there are some settings in the Trun Job advanced settings that I want to call out. So you have use specific JVM arguments, okay? And you can pass in the -XMS and the, I'm sorry, the XMS and the XMX, there we go. Yeah, the heap size basically, yeah, right, the minimum and maximum heap sizes. Now, you can override this in TAC. So whatever you're doing here, you're not going to override the administrator who's maintaining these jobs. But you should set these to be what you probably think it should be. At least it's somewhere to start, right? And if you find later when it's running in production, it doesn't have enough memory, using up too much memory, you can actually scale these back on TAC. You can do that on TAC. So. Now, if you want to know how much memory it's running, you have to use the memory run feature. Inside Studio, you can actually go down the last tab. There's memory run. It's not on the screen, so I can't show you, but and you can actually execute it, and it'll profile the memory usage of that job throughout. So you can kind of use that as a guideline, right? Okay, best practice number 15. So this is how to do dynamic SQL. There's all sorts of ways that you can do it. This is just one recommended method. So you may have run into this case before where you need to execute SQL, but you don't know what it's going to look like until runtime, right? So it could be because maybe schemas are different between prod and dev, and or what have you, or you may have it set up so that it uses a slightly different where clause in certain situations, based on what environment you're on or something like that. Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons you can come up with that, this comes up, right? So if you want to do that, the easiest way really to do it is what we're showing you here is, create some context variables that you send in. You can specify what the columns are, the where clause, the order by, and then you can string them together with a select, string it together as a dynamic SQL. I think I brought this up earlier, but an example usage would be you're in dev, you only want to pull back 100 rows, so you add in a limit. So you would have a SQL limit, you would just set it to limit 100, and it would generate appropriately, right? So, all right, so best practices. There are several parallelization options in Talend. I would say with great power comes great responsibility, or whatever. Parallelizing can make things run 10 times faster or 1,000 times slower. Okay, so it really depends. You need to be careful. Don't turn parallelization on for everything. Don't go just adding it willy-nilly, or whatever. Profile the jobs. Find the areas that are slow. Find the bottlenecks and attack those. Right, things that lend themselves well to parallelization. Okay, there is a trade-off with using parallelization. You're going to use more CPU and more memory, at the time of when it's running, right? But you'll get increased speed. So, so this is basically going through the different options for parallelization. So the first thing is you can do it at the TAC, right? You could say run these jobs in parallel. So it's job level parallelization, right? So if you're in a parent job, another way is within a parent job, you can specify, or not specify actually, just have multiple subjobs without having them linked together, right? So one thing I actually didn't, I wish I had it in front of me. So if you noticed, let me go back a little bit. I want to show you something. Let's see where it is. All right, one moment. Okay, this will do. This will do. So if you notice, this component here is green. And this component here is green. Does anybody know why these components are green? Anyone ever look into that? It's because those are entry points. Okay. Any entry point in a Talend job is actually shows up as green. I don't know if that's actually in the documentation, but that's the way it works. So if you have multiple sets of subjobs like this, they will all actually run in parallel if they're not linked together with any subjob. And they'll both be green. They'll both have a starter as green. Okay. So that was really the point of that. So that's another way of doing parallelism, is to actually have a parent job that has multiple subjobs in it that are not linked together with a trigger. So, all right, we'll scroll back down to here. Okay, great. All right, so this actually isn't a parallelization method, but it's something that we've already talked about, and it's just good to bring up. You can actually make it use an independent process for your Trun job by checkboxing that first checkbox in the Trun job
Like
properties. It's actually like spawning a new JVM. Okay, so that's something that's important to consider though when you are doing parallelism. So just keep that checkbox in mind. So then you have components. So we actually have a whole set of parallelization components. You can parallelize a single flow. Okay, so you can have a data flow coming in, and you can split that out to run on many threads and process along many threads, and then recollect it at the end for some other further processing that is not threaded or not parallelized. Okay, so there's a whole set. They're called T-parallelize. There's T-partitioner, D-partitioner, collector, and recollector. There's some examples in our help, help.talend.com on how to do those. So, and then some of our database components have parallelism built in. So for example, many of them do, some do not, but most do, where you can set the number of sessions that it's going to run some statements on. So let's say you are loading data into a table, so it's sending inserts. You can actually set that to 2 or 3, let's say, and it will create 3 sessions on the database and start inserting across all 3 in parallel as the data comes in from the previous component. So that's another useful one. It depends on your database and how many simultaneous connections that you're doing and what you're doing, right? If you're using a database, for example, like Vertica, and you're trying to do deletes, on the same table, that'll create a lock, for example, so that wouldn't be a situation where you could do that. But there are other databases where you could do that, so it really is very dependent on the database that you're working with. Okay. All right, so secrets to building successful jobs. So I don't really think these are too much of a secret, but you have to be successful, to have successful projects. You need to know what your requirements are. You need to know how you're going to solve them. You have to understand the use case, right? You have to have the right tools. Talend, is well positioned. Has over 900 connectors, so this is definitely something you can use there. And then the methodology, which is a lot of what we talked about. Execute consistently, and consistency is what I actually think is probably the most important precept from that earlier list. At least if you're wrong everywhere, right? And you can fix it all at once, fix it the same way everywhere. Consistency, I think, is key, right? All right. All right, so action is the foundational key to success. So my advice is to just get started, right? Build your guidelines document. We hope these job design patterns and best practices will help you going forward. And even if you don't use the patterns exactly as we talked about, at least you start considering the importance of creating these guidelines for your organization. So, and with that, thank you for listening. And you're welcome to read through these parting do's and don'ts. And if you have any questions for me, go right ahead. Or I'll be around here for a little while if you want to hit me up one-on-one.
I'm curious, how
So the data integration, I mean, is obviously the kind of the bread and butter, I would say. As far as numbers, I don't personally have the numbers.
I'm thinking in the room even.
What's that?
I'm thinking even in the.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, so who uses data integration for Talend? Okay. And how about ESB? Is anybody using ESB here? Okay. And then MDM? Okay. Well, there you go. All right. Anything else? No? All right.
Well, one other thing to shout out about, as I turn this off real